Hi everyone, welcome to this special Zoogla Community Fireside Chat with Rob. Right next to me here in San Francisco, as you can see. He flew in from Indonesia, and we thought, let's go ask him some amazing questions about his product management experience, what he's seen over in Southeast Asia and Asia in general, compared to the US. He's also been an amazing angel investor, so we'll dive into some of the things over there. Better product management than angel investor. But look, we're here to educate the Zoogla community with your questions at the end, but we had quite a lot of good submissions of questions already. So we'll start with those. I guess, Rob, let's start with your introduction. How did you end up with what you're doing now, and tell us about your career?
Sure. Well, let's start with what do I do today? So for the last three years or so, I've been based in Southeast Asia, running product, and then more recently product and business, sort of more like a GM type of role for a company called Gojek. I think a lot of people in the region will be familiar with Gojek. Folks in North America maybe a little less so. But way to think about it is, a collection of on-demand services. And I think 3 years ago we called them super apps, and somehow that fell out of favor. But think of it as like Lyft plus DoorDash plus Venmo plus a bunch of other types of things, kind of all pulled together into one app. And so for the last 3 years or so, I've been based in Indonesia, and kind of leading that role. Previously, most recently before that was at Lyft for a couple of years. Before that, 6 years at Google. A lot of that was working on Google Shopping. And it's, that's actually how I know Holly is sort of in and around that, partnering on a couple of things there. And then sort of that would sort of really be, like the third chapter of my career, actually, really where I've been a PM, first and foremost, and working in and around products that I'd kind of characterize as like scaled tech, where there are millions or billions of users, similar numbers in terms of transactions in dollars, global footprints, or at the very least multi-country footprints. Often a big ecosystem component, where you have lots of different actors that you need to bring together to make it all work. And that's kind of been the last 10 years plus of what I've done. Sort of 2 chapters before that kind of fed into all of this that I'll just touch upon briefly. Actually, chapter 1 was what brought me to San Francisco in the first place, which was the .com boom bubble burst. And so, a lot of like figuring out what web tech was and how to make it work, what it was really bad at doing, and started more working with large companies initially, but over time transitioned into startups in and around e-commerce and IoT and a few things like that. So that was chapter 1. And then the middle chapter was China, when it was going through massive growth from about 2005 to about 2013, 2014. And I kind of think of that as like my China hustle, in the sense that like it really was hustling, like setting up companies in some tech, but really more tech enabled, and in and around retail, a little bit of touching on green and clean energy, and media and branding, advertising, that type of thing. So that's sort of how this all kind of built up and where I got. And so I think one of the things that's interesting is I've been lucky enough to live and work in a lot of different markets and contexts. And I think that sort of has informed a lot of where I've gotten to in my career today, and like why I'm doing something like as crazy as in the middle of COVID, picking up my life and moving to Indonesia.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. And I know some folks are joining this call from the US, some are joining from Asia. I think the first question I had before we go to some submitted questions is, it's really hard job hunting these days. Would you recommend people in the US look at Asia, the opportunities there, vice versa? How do you mentor people who you know are looking for opportunities? And
that's a good question. I mean, I think the last 12 months have been hard, right? There's no way around that. Companies of all sorts, as we know, mine included, have really had to look hard at how to rationalize costs, and how to frankly do more with less. even ones that have not been in that situation have, I would say, pressed pause. And this is something not just like my observations, but talking with recruiters and headhunters all over the globe, where things have been really slow all the way up until frankly now. I'm seeing that kind of thaw a little bit, and that's also what I'm hearing from having lunch. I had lunch and coffee earlier on today with a couple different folks in the headhunting world, and they're starting to see things open up. So I think that's sort of more like globally how I would think about it. In terms of regions, I think there's absolutely a ton of value in going and looking at other areas. You can learn a lot about yourself. You can learn a lot about the practice that you bring. And working in different contexts for me has always been super rewarding and something I've gotten a lot out of. Now, in terms of like opportunity wise, feels like, and so I'm going to use a lot of feels statements in here, so don't take this as data, but feels like Europe is doing fairly well. And by Europe, say like companies in Berlin seem to be hiring, Berlin, Amsterdam, London, pretty aggressively right now. Asia, it's a bit mixed, frankly. I would say, fintech in Singapore and Hong Kong seem to be doing well. Other verticals, not so much at this point. So it's also a little bit of like, think about when you look outside of, say, for example, the US, one of the things you have to think about a little bit is the destination that you might be interested in, is it a good match with your skill set or with your experience? So like as an example, if maybe this isn't a top of mind destination for everybody, but like Hong Kong. Hong Kong is really deep in fintech right now. A little bit maybe Web3 as well. More on like the early stage side. But if you're, say, for example, someone wants to work on consumer products, like you're not going to go there.
Yep.
Even Singapore right now, like where I see the strength and where I see the bulk of the hiring, it is more in like the financial fintech banking side of things.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So some of the submitted questions were around the product landscape, especially going into as a mid-career person. I can see a couple of people up. So we're interns at Google. Can you talk more about the path into product, whether it's early in the career, mid-career, and how should someone plan that?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you want to go in, the first thing I kind of like look at is like understand like why you want to make the shift, right? There's sometimes and this certainly, I saw this happen at Google, where the notion of like a PM role was like the thing you wanted to aspire to. And there's good reasons for that, why that was what many people anchored on. But make sure you're like really looking at the fundamentals of why. Is it because it looks shiny? Is it because there's a sense of comp is better? Is it you think you're going to be more fulfilling? But like just kind of understanding like what's the good and the bad about product to begin with. And I think the other part that I always saw with folks trying to make that transition is, make the understanding that if you're particularly mid-career, there might be a bit of a step back, right? So that's kind of like the first piece. I think the second piece I look at if you want to make the change is like, how can you really understand the skills that you bring to the table, right? And so some things around like, how can you take from your experience where you've really had to be customer focused, understand customer needs, understand problems that they have, turn those into solutions, for one thing. Second piece is sort of thinking around, data fluency. And by that, I mean, it really like how you can come up with a structure or a framework of metrics where you've done that in your other kind of forms of work. And so like look at where you can pull from your current experiences, like PM style behaviors. And then, really taking those as like, those are your assets that you're bringing to the table. And so that's what you really got to like play up. The last piece I kind of think about here is like, understand where your gaps are and where you're weak. oftentimes it can be around working with specific functions because you've never done it before. Like if you've never worked in depth with design or with research or frankly engineering, that's probably gonna be a weak spot. Could be around prioritization, could be around stakeholder management. But one way that I've seen pretty successfully people navigate that and understand where their weak points are is sort of like take one of your like signature initiatives, if you will, and kind of walk through it with a PM mentor, like an experienced PM, and almost like do a retro on what skills did you bring, what skills would you say this initiative that you drove highlighted. And that can be a good way to look at to identify like where are your strengths, what should you be playing up, and where are your blind spots, and you need to be aware of.
And you've mentored plenty of product people want to go into product over your years, whether it's here or also in Asia.
Yeah.
Is there any formal education people should go through, or what should people be doing? Is it work on a small project themselves, or?
I'm laughing because I mean it's not like I went to school for this, right? And I think that's a common thing for a lot of people. You sort of end up and wind your way into it. That's not to say or diminish the value of some of the specific programs. General Assembly, one that's top of mind from at least a few years ago. Sorry, I'm not like super current on who's got the hot program right now. That's just the one brand that popped in my head. Don't take that as an endorsement. But there's certainly value in those types of programs, right? They give you tools, they give you frameworks, and they give you usually somewhat realistic context in which to practice using those things. So there's definitely value in that. But I think it's really more about like how can you develop and demonstrate core skills, right? And so what are the cores? It's really, again, customer understanding, like what problems are being faced and why does somebody need this thing solved, right? How do you translate that into an understanding of like value that's being created and exchanged into core, maybe even first principles that you can use to guide the initiative, guide how you're building a product. That's kind of one area. I think another area is really just understanding how to work with product development teams. So specifically around engineering and design, how did those come together? And data, I should also add in there, from a process standpoint. That's something, if you have no idea, that can be a good area to either lean into with self-study or, maybe a course. And then I think, again, the other core skill is really just around different ways to think about metrics and being very like fluent in them. One way to develop that is just being exposed to a lot of different types of products and contexts. Throughout my career, if I think about it, it's not like, again, I studied like how to write good metrics. It's really been much more learning from like, okay, well, we tried this thing that seemed really good. We put it into practice. It kind of failed. What do we do different next time? There's a lot of like frameworks and others that people find successful. So grounding in that, I think, is probably the other area for like a core skill to build.
Awesome. And I can see a few people in the audience who are also existing product managers, and some of them had also submitted questions about how to get to the exec level of product management. Can you share how you got there, and through mentors, and did you follow a system, and what should people listening to this actually do?
Yeah, I don't know, how did I get there? Time, blood, sweat, tears. I think maybe talk about like if you're moving into or that's what you're aspiring to, like what things that either I thought about and found helpful or things that I wish I had thought about. Maybe I can answer it in that way. I think like first and foremost, it's really important to be clear on like what's your motivation for trying to make that step, that leap, right? And I think it needs to be more than just like you want a better title, you want to have a bigger scope footprint, you want to have more comp. I think you really need to kind of ground it in what kind of skills are you going to grow? How is this going to push you? what new levels of impact is this going to allow you to achieve that you couldn't necessarily do before? And I think it's sort of to say that, at least for me, if my intent's not in the right spot, then I'm doing it just for, you know, the title and the quote prestige. I think it sets you up for a tough road. So that's kind of like the first piece I would say. I think the second one, and this is critical, and this is actually, I think, the big gap between exec and non-exec, is just really your ability to dive deep and to partner deeply around business, financials, things along those lines. So investing in like sharpening that. Am I saying go get an MBA if you don't have one? No. But you know, make sure you have fluency in the ability to understand you know, frankly, like financial statements in depth and how they map into the products that you're working with. So that's, I think, the second piece. I think the third, fourth, fifth, they're probably things after that. It's really more about like how you work with your team and some of the things that you do to sort of facilitate that. I think being clear about what has helped me, at least, is being clear about like where are my strengths and where are my blind spots, and being very open about that with my exec peers, other people on, say, like an exec leadership team. It helps build a lot of trust around relationships, but it also helps you kind of collaborate in a much more productive and effective way. And I think that's been something that it was hard to do, but it, you know, because there's a little bit of like vulnerability that you're bringing to the table there, right? Like you're saying, I'm actually not good at this one thing or two things. And I found that to be really effective. I think expectation setting is super important. And by that, I mean understanding what's expected of you, but also what do you need from your CEO? What do you need from the board? You know, other types of things in order to succeed. You know, really be clear on that. I think the last two that I'll say is just really around like team management. Figuring out a set of processes to manage your team that are simple, repeatable, and you can do consistently. You know, don't make things overly complex. Find the simplest possible process that works to, you know, run performance management, to run feedback, to run one-on-ones, to run broad communications for your whole org. What I found is the more complex that is, the less likely you are to execute it consistently, and consistently for a large org, consistency is just vital. Finally, you're an exec, you still need to dive in. You're still going to need to problem solve. You're still going to need to drive things more than you think.
Just the last question on this, in terms of how you divided your own time.
Yeah.
We're talking about before you have a family, clearly you're busy with your own exec work, diving in, family stuff. How have you found time management, and what tips do you have?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I think it's just trying to, having kids actually helps, because it forces you to really, you know, prioritize, focus, make the most of your time. As the reality is, I kind of like to see them, although it's been challenging with the amount of travel I've been doing. So, you know, I think just really trying to be clear about the things that you are and are not doing. And this goes back to, you know, core of it, what I mentioned earlier about expectation setting. If you have a clear set of expectations, it then makes it much easier for you to come up with, here's the scope of stuff I need to get done, and then prioritize that accordingly based upon, you know, whatever's working for you. And I think that's I guess from like a high level framework perspective, that's what served me the best.
And before we go into more of the folks who are beginning in their career, just last question regarding being the exec that you've seen. You've booked in some of the most iconic companies in this past 10 years. And how have they structured things differently? And if you were looking back, hindsight's always 2020.
Yeah.
Would you have structured things differently? And are most of them structured the same to see the same success? Or
that's a great question. I would say that I think it's most important to have clarity around what your structure is and why you're doing it. Less about like one is better than the other. So that's sort of the first piece. And then the second piece is like, is it working effectively, right? And if it's not working effectively, how do you identify that and how do you fix it? So, I think one of the things I've seen over the last, let's use my current role as an example. One of the things that maybe has been challenging is that it is both very much a product and a business role combined over a very large product footprint. And were I to do it again, I might think about doing it differently. Think about either saying, okay, for a footprint of this size, it makes more sense to focus functionally, or take like a smaller footprint and have more of like a single-threaded leader model. So like to a degree, I think it's more about not that like functional structure or STL structure, single-threaded leader structure, one is better than the other. I think they both have pluses and minuses, but it's really about, is the way you've implemented it being effective or not? And so I think that's sort of the big piece. I think the other piece that I would look at, and this is like a very product management thing to say, but PMs, hopefully this resonates. Like, I think a good measure is if your structure is having a hard time making and then implementing decisions, that's probably a sign that something is a bit amiss. And then, that can really be I suppose like a spur for troubleshooting. That's something, I won't get into specifics on this one specifically, but that was a good sign of some of the challenges that we faced when I was at Lyft, as an example.
Last question before I go to more of the early career stuff. Is it easy to go through enterprise versus consumer, or how should someone think about the career as they think of divergent paths?
I think so. Me, I've bounced around in industries a fair bit. I've done small companies, medium companies, large companies. I don't think it's hard per se for the individual. I mean, there's always learning curves when you jump into a new industry or you jump into new type of tech or something along those lines. I think the harder parts can be I suppose like convincing your would-be employer of your applicability. In some cases, they're seeking out, a new perspective, new angle. Like this is one of the things that sometimes see with in the financial world. And I think there's actually open roles, companies looking for this right now in fintech in Southeast Asia, where they actually want to hire outside of people with financial background, as an example. I think I see a little bit less back and forth on the, say, for example, like enterprise SaaS into consumer. That's kind of a big stretch. I think what I would encourage people that want to make a shift to do is like look at what you have worked on and really try to like understand what are the types of problems that you have solved that are similar to, say, like to a different domain. So for example, if you worked on, I'll use an example from my background with Google Shopping, right? It's really actually Google Shopping, while it's, ads on search and price comparison on the tab and, 20 other features sprinkled over and around Google. The core of it, it's like a product for the retail ecosystem, right? So there's consumer-facing components, there's advertiser and brand-facing components. And when you're working in like an ecosystem, there's often multiple stakeholders or multiple users that you're having to. So think about it from your experiences. Can you like weave that story of like, actually, I've been working on a product that ultimately the demand side is consumer, but it's actually providing services back to a business. And so that's kind of the narrative I would think if someone was trying to make the jump from consumer to enterprise. Yeah.
Thank you. So what I've seen in the past 2-3 weeks is some of the consumer companies here actually remove a layer at a director level from the product organization. Some folks here on the call are more early in their careers. How should someone think and adapt to such changes, and what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, well, no, that's totally true. I mean, I've done that, actually been doing that in my own org. And I would say, and I don't frame this as like, oh, was ahead of the curve, but flattening is something that I started to realize the value of when I was at Lyft. And it's, sorry, to be clear, it's not, I don't see it so much more as flattening in the context of PMs, but rather really trying to refine, like, what does it mean to be a manager as a PM, and when is that appropriate, right? And so I would say that I think the path forward, the trend path forward, I don't know, and who knows how this is going to play out, but I think that there's a lot more push towards staying in IC longer. Actually, Google did this right around the time that I joined in 2013, if I recall. There was a push to basically remove PM managers from below, what was it? It was SPM was like and previously they had like L5, L6 PMs who could be managers. And the thesis behind it, which I very much agree with, is that as a PM, you're helping facilitate across all of these functions. You should be able to do that and get really good at that over larger scopes. And you should be able to operate somewhat, autonomously. Yes, you do need to roll up into an individual eventually, but that individual scope needs to be kind of like so huge and represent a lot of impact. And so I think like that kind of ethos, that kind of thinking is something that I've seen implemented more and more. And I think this is a challenge that companies across the board are facing, is like, what's the more clear, like, IC, individual contributor path for PMs? And a lot of this is getting undone because, if you really look at it, and this was part of the zero interest rate funding era, right? Like, there was a lot of money pumped in, headcount was bloated. You need people to manage people. And so, but they weren't really driving impact commensurate to the footprint of the teams. And that's sort of, not a surprising or not very insightful way to describe what has happened. But I think the path forward is going to be, like, expectation should be that you're going to be in IC longer than maybe you would have 5 years ago.
So have that expectation for career path.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in general, I would say, I don't know, this is a very, maybe you could argue this is a very personal philosophy point of view, but it's like, what's driving you to want to manage people, right? And really understand what that is, because it's a very different form of impact than building, launching, scaling, landing a product.
So we've seen over the past 10-15 years, and especially even more recently, a lot of Google product leadership have moved on to leadership roles, whether it's yourself, even at Lyft and Gojek. People have gone to Microsoft and even bigger roles. What was in the Google DNA or ecosystem with the product side that we've seen people plucked over to these other early stage startups are doing really well, to some even larger companies like Microsoft?
Like, what's the
what did Google do well to follow the whole why do people value ex-Google product managers?
Sure.
And leaders for that?
I think it feels like we're just going to sound like I'm patting all of us on the back. It's like, good job, guys.
Was it something Jonathan Rosenberg did? Was it Marissa? Like, what happened in the Google ecosystem?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things, right? One, and this comes across as feedback almost universally is that almost every Google PM has worked at scale that is almost second to none in many cases, right? Particularly if you're working on some of the primary products, like you're dealing with billions across all of your metrics, and you're doing this at like a global scale, global footprint, and that's not a common experience. Like what you realize when you get out of the environment of Google and the Google context is that you actually do have a very unique experience from that in and of itself. So I think that's one piece. I think the second piece is, and to be clear, I think it's not exclusive to Google, but it's Google and a small handful of other companies, right? That we could probably all name. I think the second piece that for me resonates, and this actually goes into a lot of, I suppose almost say like my bias around PMs, is that there was, even up until when I left in 2019, still a bit of like a generalist kind of mindset. It shifted a bit between when I joined in 2013 and when I left 6 years later. But there was still this notion that it was less about like what your concrete background was in terms of working on problem spaces or specific tech, and more about like the mechanics of how to do the job. And I think if you look at the people that have gone off to do well elsewhere, they've kind of landed on one of those two vectors. They've either like taken something that was 0 and scaled it to billion. They took something that was big and scaled it even further, or they did this across a bunch of different thorny problems, problem areas, and they showed like the well-roundedness, if you will, or the pliability, if you will. So I think those are the two things that I would anchor on from a Google standpoint.
And feel free to pass on this question, but given your time in Southeast Asia, if someone here, whether it's in the US or in Asia, looking to hire someone with the solid experience in product in a Southeast Asian-based company, besides Gojek, where else should people look at hiring from? Who have you seen that really has got the type of pedigree that Google has developed over the years? And if there's no one, it's fine too. We'll delete this section from the recording. But where should people look for hiring is what the question is.
Are you hiring?
No, well, I am hiring. My startup is hiring, and we are based in Singapore too. So
I set you up. You can do the plug and give the pitch now and talk about your open roles.
Ex-Googlers are more affordable when you're a Series B, C company. I think we're much smaller.
That is a problem. Actually, sorry, just looping back to like other regions as well. I mean, that's just speaking frankly, that is one of the challenges, right?
Yeah.
If you were to say be based in the Bay Area and you want to make a leap over to Southeast Asia as an example, the number of roles that will pay a global pay scale are pretty small.
I tried to convince my friend to apply for a job in Singapore. He was a PM here at Google and went somewhere else. He said the pay in Southeast Asia is too low for him to make the move.
Yeah. Well,
it's only finance that he can make the move. And
exactly.
Be paid consumer.
It's not to say there aren't those roles, but they're pretty select, if you will. And as you know, Singapore is not the cheapest place to live.
Oh, it's getting more expensive by the day, but
it is.
It's expensive for a reason. It's the premium product.
So let me think about answering your question. Like, where would I hire from?
And we take it offline afterwards. I thought that was
no. I think I don't know that it's. I try to look at like I'm not going to name names, but is either the company or the area of product the person has worked on, have they gone through some challenge in order to get it to the point where it's actually landed? And I think that's actually one of the challenges with a lot of least at, you know,
Finding product market
their
fit in
scope.
that area.
Yeah, well, so as an example, a lot of companies, and this is a challenge in Southeast Asia. There are a lot of companies that were funded quite well.
Yep.
They drove growth through basically spending via, you know, incentives, promos, you know, papering over customer acquisition costs with whatever they had raised. And it blurred the degree to which they had achieved product market fit. And so I would really look for individuals who, within their scope of influence, had been able to push beyond that. Yeah. Sorry, that's maybe a more of a like set of concepts one could use than where to go higher from.
Thank you. So another submitted question was, how is software product development approaches different from deep tech and development approaches?
Interesting. Okay, so I think what this is asking is like more product that is focused on an end user, be it a consumer or a business, versus something that is more like foundational tech or like a platform product. I think that's what they're asking. So I've worked on both. I think it's really mostly around who the user is. So like, are they a quote end user, you know, an individual, a small, medium, or large business, or are where, you know, there's problems to solve that are how to say, they're intrinsic to, you know, their life, their well-being, their enjoyment, their success. Versus are they a technical user where it's enabling them to get a job done or do so more efficiently with lower cost or something along those lines. So it's really, it's more about like, how does the product get consumed, if you will, and to a little bit like what someone's trying to achieve. I think like the biggest thing from a product perspective that I see is like, if you're working on something more tech, you probably have to go deeper into tech, right? Like you're one other area that I think it sometimes comes into play is like if it's more about the PM sometimes in this, or people who have the role of PM sometimes end up, if it's a deep tech product, they're more in like the bridging role. It looks a little bit more like, okay, how do I bring it to market? How do I, you know, partner with customers to help like jointly develop something, things along those lines.
Cool.
So it's a little bit different in that context. Sorry, I'm not.
No.
I think that's what you were asking, but
I think it was a couple of tough questions. So what I would go to a couple of categories, because I know we want to make sure we have some time for open questions as well. There was a lot of questions based on your experience regarding how do you compare operating in Asia and building product in Asia versus the US, also growth on both sides. Could you sort of give us a couple of minutes for thoughts from your viewpoint on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so if you look at like product management as like I don't know, function, it's definitely, if I think about Southeast Asia in specific, right? It's like earlier in its life cycle, so to speak, and I don't think there should be a surprise around that. I've seen in the last 3 years that I've been there, there's a lot of, you know, energy, a lot of growth in the field. There's a lot of like grassroots. Feels like at some point everyone's got a blog and a podcast talking about you know, frameworks and other things that they have found successful, which is great. Like it's a sign that there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of excitement around the field, and people are trying to improve the practice, if you will. And I think where the challenges are, or the development areas, and I don't think these are specific necessarily to Southeast Asia, but there are things that I've seen. So I think there's generally more depth on project delivery skills as opposed to product strategy, you know, understanding and anchoring on and being like the guardian of generating customer value and solving customer problems. So a lot of the PMs, particularly on the more junior side, they've been, they've come in the door more focused, say, on like Jira than on who the customer is, and how do we build, make sure that we're building the right, identify what the problem to solve is, and then make sure we're building the right thing to solve
Or the
that problem.
process than
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one area. As I said earlier, working at scale is kind of a unique thing. So like working at scale is much less frequent. There's a lot fewer, seems like there's fewer highly opinionated PMs. Where they bring a really strong point of view to their product. For me, I think that's a very important skill and something that we really have tried to encourage amongst my teams. I think there's less lower level bias to decision making. And making high quality decisions. I think it's more of like a skill and habit and training and expectation setting thing. That you do it enough times and then it starts to become intrinsic to what you do. So I think that's more on like the PM side. I think in terms of like products in Southeast Asia, the region, just by nature of like how many countries fall under that like broad umbrella, like unless you're truly are just launching in Singapore as an example, like you got to be global from day one. So it changes some of the decisions that you're going to probably have to take. You're either going to be like do it by being English and assume that that's going to be enough, or you're going to have to deal with localization and internationalization from day one. I think the other ones that are really big that have been expensive for us have really been around like regulatory and payments, right? Like every country is different, and the payment rails, the degree to which they are one, different country to country, and then two, at quite wide stages of development. Huge.
So just at that point, you've been in SF for a couple of days now, and clearly you are from here. Is there something that's still in the US that's not in Indonesia or Southeast Asia yet they wish someone would launch?
Something is not in the US.
That it's in the US. That's not in Southeast Asia yet.
Oh my. That's a tough one.
Or have you used specific apps since you've been back here in North America for the past couple of days that this is available?
I've got a cheeky answer, which is like good tacos.
Restaurant. Someone to open a restaurant.
But that's not a fair one to do.
Maybe there isn't, but
I mean, I think there's been a lot of things have been tried, right? And this actually goes into like the last part that I think is different or harder about thinking about products in the region, right? Is that some of the things that have worked, say in North America for monetization, right? Like subscriptions, they're not necessarily a good fit with Southeast Asia. Could be because there's not like it's not part of the consumer habit. Could be that the idea of a monthly outlay, just doesn't fit with someone's socioeconomic situation. The other thing that I think can be challenging is it really pushes on your unit economics sometimes, right? Like to the point where like at Gojek, like we worry about pennies per transaction because it makes a difference, right? So like we'll do things like ask the question, do we really need to have an ML model to drive pricing when we can come up with a simple grid system and it's 2 cents per transaction cheaper to run the grid system, right? Actually, because you're not going to see the uplift on it. So it sort of forces you to think about things differently. So I guess like, in that context, I think a lot of things have been tried. And I think what we're seeing right now is, and particularly with the challenges of the last couple of years, is like the things that are viable are certainly falling off.
So couldn't have this fireside chat like this in this day and age in San Francisco if I ask about Gen AI. So how has generative AI changed your own product management work, the work of your team, and what can you share about your perspective on Gen AI? And
Yeah, good one. Yeah, it's kind of hot, right? It's a hot topic, I think. I mean, I'd love to get how it's impacting everyone on this call, because I think it's sort of, we've all got different perspectives and different experience. And one of the things that actually, for me, I love hearing and seeing is like how people are using it. Like,
yeah.
you know, what's the use case that you've discovered? And I think that's actually kind of the interesting part, is these are the things that are going to bubble up, and, you know, somebody will figure out how to productize and monetize. But I mean, in the context of, you know, me, my teams, so I kind of look at it as like, first and foremost, it's something that can, you know, can amplify your effectiveness. And so the analogy I would use is like, you know, search, like Google search, when it came out, it vastly helped change the way I did work, right? Because I could actually start to do research super effectively, find all my competitors, you know, find all sorts of things from like you know, tech research perspective, you know, white papers on different things. A lot of different components that really did that. You know, collaborative docs also is another example. And so I sort of see it as like, first and foremost, it's like, okay, how can I find ways in which it amplifies my effectiveness? A little bit of that is like, so I would then say like, you know, okay, hey, PMs, don't just sort of Gen AI your way to a GPT your way to writing PRDs. But it can be a really reasonable way to generate some, you know, starting points for how you can structure, say, for example, a set of principles that go into the product that you're building, or the product that, you know, the requirements that you're trying to pull together. And so like using it as like an amplifier to kind of like speed you through that process, I think has been, you know, kind of one of them. I think the other area, and this is sort of what I was referring to with like people creating all of these different use cases, like from my point of view, one of the things that's really nice or interesting about what's happening right now is that a lot of the platforms let you do experimentation without having to, you know, necessarily go deep into code, go deep into underlying data. So you can like play around with a lot of different use cases, right? Like, and engineer your prompts, so to speak.
Awesome.
And I think that gives like PMs a really good opportunity to just like kind of play around and like find out what works for you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's go to the submitted questions. The first one, actually live submitted questions, I mean, is you've been a hiring manager for many years now. Someone in the audience, and I won't say who it is, it's that during a network event or some casual talks from LinkedIn, he's very keen to know what kind of character or story would entice you to bring a specific candidate to formal interview process. So what would they need to show you to bring them in?
So I think what I end up trying to look for is sort of two things from like a character perspective, or character that, you know, comes across as part of an interaction I'm going to have with somebody. You know, like I'm assuming we're not going to like do a walkthrough of someone's resume in a networking event, right? But, you know, looking at it as is an individual able to have a really engaging, active conversation where they're, you know, they're actively listening, they're asking interesting questions, they're displaying curiosity, right? And so I think that there's the two pieces to that are like, you know, a notion of trying to learn something and be curious, but also the listening component. Because if you think about it from like a product standpoint, that's like literally what you have to do to get inside the heads of your customers and understand, you know, are you building the right thing, or what should you be building to begin with? And so, you know, the way that you approach people, it's not, from my perspective, the worst thing you can do is actually do a walkthrough of your resume, right? It's not about telling a compelling story in that. It's really like, how can you engage me in it doesn't matter what the topic is, frankly, right? Like, could be about what I'm working on, could be something that you're working on, could be the context of the event, right? Cool. Could be the cocktails. Like, doesn't actually matter, right? But it's really about, can you show, because that's like such a core skill for PM. I think that would be my first and foremost.
Thank you. Al, you want to unmute and ask your question, or should I ask your question for you?
Sure, I can ask. Thank you. My question was about the differences in how you understand needs and wants and how you see it done in the US versus Asia. Anything that we can learn about interviewing and kind of observing and really understanding deeply needs that you see want to hear, or other way around?
So let's see. I've been pretty fortunate in the sense that I've had in Gojek, I've had quite a large research team. And it's something that you know, the company had started investing in actually before I joined. And part of what drove that was our team structure. So Gojek has a big tech footprint in Indonesia, but also an equivalently large tech footprint in India. But we don't operate in India. And so what was quickly clear was to sort of bridge that gap. Yeah, you could do some flying of people over and things like that, but that sort of runs into its limitations. And so we really needed to invest in a research. Now, in terms of like the underlying, you know, mechanisms, things along those lines, I think the part that I've seen better results come out of in-person, on the ground, much more so than, you know, sort of focus groups and the like. And I think it's because you're taking people out of their day-to-day context more. And I think this is just a hypothesis. I don't actually have this proven out, but I think it's because people are being taken out of, you know, really what their day-to-day is, and they're being put into this, you know, unique situation that is kind of biasing their answers. They kind of try to game it a little bit more and like give you the answer they think you want. So what I found is that like deep on the ground, like going in and like sitting down with the driver of a two-wheel scooter that's driving, you know, that's doing our deliveries, and meeting, you know, spending the day with six of those folks has been way more effective than anything else.
Al, was there any follow-up, or are we good? Sounds like we're good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Any suggestion on B2B? Same idea. Try to get deep.
I think it depends on. So where I've gotten the most out of this, and this shouldn't be surprising, is like actually the answer is the same. You know, like when I was at Google, where did I learn most? You know, working on ads products, it was when I was actually talking to the advertisers. And so similarly, like just really trying to you know, dive in, say for example, like in GoFood, we have a big merchant ecosystem that we engage with. And so going and spending time with small, medium, and large merchants and like understanding their business, understanding what challenges that they're facing, and not just sort of from like a words perspective, but like seeing those challenges in action. That's been sort of the most impactful. So yeah, I think short answer is like yes, pretty much the same from a business standpoint.
Thank you.
So Janay's asking, what traits of behavior set a great PM apart from a good PM?
I think the curiosity and listening component is that I mentioned before. So, you know, again, like how are you gonna capture my eye? That's a big part of it. I think that really trying to drive to clarity and simplicity around principles and value that underlie your product, and like thinking about it as like as simple as possible a system. I think that's the second piece. And then I think the third piece is really, and don't take this as like you need to figure out how to be like friendly and cordial with everybody, because it's not what this is about, but like working with individuals of all different functions, all different levels, all different backgrounds, and having that ability to bring those folks together to get what you need to get done. It's really those three.
So maybe a couple more questions before we wrap up. What's the best sales job to convince everyone joining call in San Francisco to move to Southeast Asia, Rob? Why should someone do what you did, uplift their life, their family, and say, we're going to Bali?
Yeah. I mean, on the Bali thing, just quickly on that, it was an amazing thing to do during COVID, and no regrets about it. It's been really hard for the last year and a half, because the other part about, my business, the business at Gojek, there's such a local component and so much that needs to be, so much time and energy that needs to be spent with, on the ground, both inside the company as well as outside the company, that, I'm on the road, 80% of the time. And so there are downsides to that, but what's exciting about it? Like for me, I think it's the degree to which you can be put in a situation where you can learn, if you're willing to listen, you're willing to be curious, you can learn a lot about, human, societal, other types of challenges, and, hopefully have impact on those, right? And from a positive way. And I don't sort of put that in like a savior context. It's just there's a lot of growth and development. You have economies that are literally changing year by year. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to be a part of that story, and part of how you kind of like write that story, that story gets written. So I think that's one piece. I think depending on where you live, you'll experience some amazing culture, food, friendship moments. So there's a lot of different aspects around that. But I think first and foremost, just like the pace of change, and some of the fundamentals of society, the rate at which they're changing, being able to kind of shape that, I think is one of the big things.
Yep. And you chose Indonesia. We have Hanson dialing in from Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah.
Should some people consider Ho Chi Minh City, Singapore, or how would you perhaps give an overview, since you've been traveling so many?
I mean, they're all very different, right? Singapore is going to be the easiest move for someone coming from San Francisco, I would wager, just given, infrastructure development, pace of life, things like that. Although it's too damn hot there. Like it's literally like the same hot temperature every day, except when it rains.
They have great air conditioning.
They do. They're very good at air conditioning. So I think like Singapore is easy, similar to like how Hong Kong was 5-6 years ago. Ho Chi Minh City's got a lot going on right now. I would say that there is hiring of expat talent for more senior roles. Language is a little bit more of a challenge in Vietnam, not surprisingly. But economy's growing. They're benefiting a lot from some of the economic and geopolitical challenges that China is facing. And so manufacturing is moving. There's a rising middle class, things along those lines. Quite interesting there. Indonesia, a fascinating country, right? Like how to characterize it. It's a little less developed from an infrastructure perspective. So you can, if you want an amazing experience that is hugely diverse, where you have 17,000 islands in the archipelago, right? And they're all different. And so everything from what you get in Bali to what you get in Java to what you get in Jakarta, what do you get in some other place. So I think it's more a question of like what would fit you. But if you're thinking about it from the opportunity to move as an expat, easiest one, barring what I sort of mentioned earlier around fintech, it is Singapore at this point.
And what did we cover today that you think the community should learn from you, Rob? That I'm sure there's many more topics we have covered, but are there specific things that came in from the questions that you saw that you want to make sure that we cover here?
No, I mean, I think questions were really fun to kind of go through, and I want to, honestly just like thank you all for spending a minute or two to share what you were looking for and kind of top of mind. Really actually quite like helpful and healthy for me to like think about what the hell I've been doing for the past 3-4 plus years. And I think that's actually that's one of the things that I didn't mention, thinking about like moving to the region. Can be a little isolating sometimes, like when you're at a certain level. I think that your peer group is certainly not like you are in San Francisco, right? You're not going to walk down the street and bump into another VP of product, as an example. And I think that's something that silly to say this, but I kind of like realized that in the last couple of days, kind of prepping for this. But I think in general, like working on product for me has been, and really focusing on it for the last 10 years has been super rewarding, a ton of fun. I've learned a lot. I've got to work with some amazing groups of people across all sorts of different functions. And it's really, I think it's been a really great way for me to just, evolve professionally, but, also hate to say this, not like I product manage my family, but, things that have like spilled over in other aspects of my life. So, yeah.
Cool. Great. And the last question is, what can the Zoogla community do to be helpful to you?
Jeez. I don't know. I think things like this, frankly, like I've always been struck by the number of events. I think actually, if anything, I have a hard time actually keeping track of what's going on. I think that's what your company's trying to help solve, right?
Yep, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
No one can see key. You hear more of it.
You didn't pay me for that.
No, I did not pay Rob for that for sure. But
no, but I think understanding ways in which can engage and contribute. Like, so as an example, is as like I've been doing the Zoogla informal mentoring for a couple of, I don't know, 3-4 years now, and that's been great. I think that just looking at like different ways where as a community we can create value, help each other, help grow, things like that.
Thank you.
More of that.
Thank you, Robin. I know we didn't get to every single question that was submitted, so at least live questions. So please feel free to message Rob directly on LinkedIn. He's always been very supportive to mentor people and be helpful. And as he said, he found all your submissions actually really educational too and helpful. So thank you to the community for making it so enriching and rewarding for everyone being part of it. We'll see you in the next event.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Chris.